Hello again, it's Lock Noob, and just look at this absolutely gorgeous antique padlock. I believe this to be probably just over 100 years old, and this was kindly given to me on loan by a friend of mine, and it has a really interesting story. So my friend knows that I'm a lockpicker, and she was going through her late father's effects, and she remembered this padlock, a padlock that she had played with all through her life, and as a child and beyond had tried to play around with it and find the code. Nobody in the family knew what the code was, and after his passing, she was always remained curious as to what the code might be. Maybe it was because it's all letters on here. There's I think there's 26 or so letters and symbols on here. Maybe there was a message, maybe there was a code, a word, a name, who knows. And she was just very curious, so she asked me very nicely whether I could have a go at decoding it. Now, of course, being a lockpicker and somebody who loves locks, I mean, this is absolutely gorgeous lock. These go for hundreds of pounds in this condition. These beautiful vintage antique padlocks. I said to her, look, you have to understand that decoding a lock at all can put strain on the lock, and you know, it's old. It could, unlikely, but it could damage the lock. Also, I said, these old locks, some of the mechanisms can be quite simple, but some of them can be really canny, and it could be that whatever the mechanism is on the inside does not lend itself to the ways I know of decoding these combination dial padlocks. But she was very, very accepting of the risk and trusted me with the padlock. So I said, well, do you know what? I'll give it a go. Now, you might be thinking, did you decode it? And long story short, yes, I did. So I'm not going to reenact the decoding and pretend that I didn't decode it and didn't know what the code is and, you know, do an act on camera. That's really not my style. But I do want to show you how I did decode this, because it's possible that you have a lock quite like this in your collection and have no clue how to find the code to one of these beautiful antique padlocks. It could be that you are not a lock picker or a lock collector, but you have one of these at home, maybe a similar story to my friends, and you want to know a bit about this padlock, what it is, how it works, and also maybe how to decode it and recode it. Now, I'm not going to recode it, but I think I do know how to do it, and whilst I could be wrong, I'm about 90% sure how this functions. So if you don't mind indulging me, I'm going to take you through my process of how I decoded this absolutely gorgeous padlock, which is, well, it says Brecknell London on it. So I can only assume that that is a company mark, and this was made by a company called Brecknell in London, albeit that might not be the case at all. So what did I do first? Well, the first thing I did was research the padlock. So I started to look for Brecknell London, and I could find absolutely nothing. There was a company called Brecknell Limited who made scales, weighing scales. I think they still exist in some form or another. Then there were references to coin-operated ticket machines. Now, it's possible that the companies that made ticket machines or the scales could have made padlocks. Old companies quite often have a history of making all sorts of things you wouldn't expect them to in their lineup of things. But unfortunately, there was nothing I could find about Brecknell locks or pictures of locks with Brecknell on them. But there were lots of combination locks very, very similar to this, and a quick image search showed quite a few. The most interesting image I saw was one of these locks, a very similar lock, not the same brand, I don't think, that was opened, and that was a great find. Why? Well, it showed that the lock opens by pulling away this end of the lock. In this padlock, it only comes out by about 4 or 5 millimeters, about a quarter of an inch. In the picture, this whole end piece had come away, and you could see the core that runs down the center of the lock with teeth on it. Now that was fantastic, because that means I think I know the mechanism of this lock. And you can see here that there is definitely a join between the outer end of the lock and the inner core. It almost seems sacrilege bringing this awful lock into the picture, but I keep hold of locks like this because they are great teaching aids, and this is pretty much a copy of what you see in that picture. You see this core, or this rod, with teeth on. This one has 1, 2, 3, well, sort of 4 teeth aligned with, if you can put it there, the actual wheels themselves. If you look down here, you'll see that there is a gap that runs all the way down the inner wheels. The numbers are on an outer wheel, the inner wheels. And if I turn this number, you can see that that gap closes. So that's basically how it works. These teeth are only able to pass through the inner wheels underneath these pink outer wheels if the gap in the wheels aligns with the correct number. And that is what you see here. If you forgive me the image, you basically have a rod or a core running through these 6 wheels with teeth on, and the teeth are detained by the inner wheels of these outer wheels with the letters on, and somewhere underneath the correct letters will be a gap. The other picture I found, which was interesting and was a little bit of a warning, was an image of a lock which had a small crack or fault across here. Now this is cast brass with an iron shackle. Now the casting process on most of these is probably perfect and robust, but since I don't have an X-ray machine, I can't see if there are any faults or flaws on the internal of this lock. And if I was to put too much stress on any part of this, I ran the risk of maybe bending, or even worse, cracking or breaking off these little lugs. This brings me on to how could I decode this? Well, the standard method with any wheeled combination lock like this is to pull the shackle. As we know, that won't work because the shackle itself is hinged here, is pinned there, but actually doesn't exert any force laterally on the rod that runs through the center of this lock. So you have to pull. So that's number one. If you do a shackle pull, then you'd need to push from this side, maybe with one finger, and push up with your thumb on the other. And that's really, really quite uncomfortable and awkward. So like that. And then what you would do is you would feel for which of these wheels are binding, and you would turn it until you felt the wheel sort of go click, and you'd have a little wriggle, so it'd be stiff, and then it sort of go loose because the tooth which is binding against the inner wheel of the lock is it basically would find its gate. It would find the gap underneath the correct letter. Now that is the way I thought I'd give this a go, but there are a couple of problems with doing the standard, let's call it a shackle pull method. One, as I mentioned before, very uncomfortable to pull like this or push on like this. You can't do it for more than 30 seconds or so. It's really horrible. There is hardly any purchase on here. It's not like a shackle where you can pull it like this or push it with your thumbs like that. This is very awkward, but assuming you could do that, I also have a very, very stiff wheel here. This is really stiff. It's hard to get across on camera, but this is very stiff. These are comparatively loose. There's as it goes round, it's a little tight here, then it sort of goes loose again, and then it tightens up, and then it goes loose again. But these are very loose. The other thing is, if you notice, as I turn one wheel, all the other wheels turn. They really do rub up against each other. So with a standard shackle pull method, where I exert some force, pulling the teeth against the inside wheels of the lock, find the binding wheel, turn it until I felt for the gap on the inner wheel, and you know, I know that's the right letter. If I tried to turn these, it's almost impossible to turn them independently, and I don't have enough hands to hold these wheels straight as I turn the binding wheel and put force on the lock. Very, very difficult. Then I thought, well, could I do a reverse decode? And the answer is yes, I probably could try to do a reverse decode. What's that? Well, you start out with, you put some tension on, find the binding wheel, and then you turn that binding wheel one position. So now it's on a star, if that was the binding wheel. Put the shackle on, then test the other wheel, see if any of them bind in turn. And if it does bind and goes stiff, then you know that that first number is probably real, and the number on the binding wheel is actually going to be the binding wheel itself is then going to be the next one you have to find the number for, turning letter by letter. I'll demonstrate that in a minute. But then there's another problem. So not only do we have uncomfortable shackle pull, very stiff wheel, no independence in the wheels, but we also have slippy wheels. If you look down here, you'll see that there is some residue around the edges of the lock, and this isn't corrosion. This, I think, is metal polish. This has been much loved and kept in great condition, but probably, unfortunately, using some abrasive cleaning. Now, any antique person would tell you don't use any abrasive cleaning on brass or bronze or anything like that, because it wears the detail away. But this is really slick to touch. These little coin-edged ridges on here, which are supposed to provide grip, really don't if they start to bind up. They are almost slick. I've tried using a rubber band around it. I've tried using gloves. Nothing really works. So that does, however, lend itself again better not to the shackle pull method, but to the reverse decoding method, where we are going wheel by wheel, trying to find, and letter by letter, try to find whether changing one letter here causes one of the other wheels to bind up, which would mean that that letter, if that was the right one, would be the correct position for that wheel, and then you go to the next wheel which was binding, change it letter by letter and go down. Again, I'll show you that in a second. So yeah, just out of interest, I did a little calculation, and there are around, if you wanted to brute force this is sort of method 4. If you wanted to brute force this, is around 300 million possible combinations here, which would take you a number of years, I think, to try to find if you went A, B, carried on all the way through. Right, so on to the meat of the video. How did I decode this? Well, the first thing to do is to figure out how to apply tension to the shackle consistently so that I could at least turn one of the wheels or find the binding wheel and move on from there. And the answer came with this, which is Kevlar thread. This has a 50-pound rating at 100 meters. So that is really, really, really strong. I've tried to snap this and I'm not weak, and it is really, really tough. Be warned though, you have to be careful with Kevlar thread because it doesn't give, and yeah, you don't want to like cut yourself on it or anything like that, but this is so strong. So I basically got myself a nice length of it and I tied it. I've made a knot in it. I've tied it around the shackle like this. So this is where the hinge is. So you want this thread, I actually did a double loop like this, just underneath where the shackle comes under, like that. And that then I tied off against a desk. So I basically put this double layer of Kevlar like that, and that then against the leg of my desk, the other end, meant that I could just pull up on the shackle like that with my free hand, and with the other hand I could manipulate the dials. So for this video I only have a single thread of Kevlar on here, but listen to how tight that is as I'm pulling it. Now that is exerting quite a lot of force on here, so we do have to be careful that we don't damage the lock. So reverse decoding, it starts off taking quite a lot of time and then will get quicker as you go through. So the first thing to do is notice that all the wheels are loose, and then I apply tension. Then I'm looking for the one which is binding. That means the one which is rubbing against the teeth in the core or plug that runs down the center of this lock, and those teeth are binding against the inner wheels where there isn't a gap. So I'm looking through here, and that first wheel is normally very stiff, but this will not turn hardly at all. It's so stiff at this point. So that indicates to me that this is binding currently the first wheel first. So what would I do? I would literally turn it. I'll go, well, as I pull that, it's on G, all of these are loose. So I'd release the tension, I would turn it to F, increase the tension, it's still all very loose, and I'll just keep going down. E now, apply tension back on, and again, it's all very loose. Go back down, and you just keep going. And I kept going, thinking, will this ever work? And God, it's so stiff. Then I got to N, and you can see as I was turning that, all these other wheels like that, pull, and then I tried, and oh look, the next wheel along is now binding. Look, it can barely turn. All these are loose, and this one barely turns. So that made me think, okay, is this an N? So now I've got to release the tension and turn this next dial here, and it just so happens, as it happens, that wheel is now set to the next letter. But watch, as I pull tension, it's now AN along this marker line. And again, these wheels are nice and loose, but look, this has now become stiff. The fourth wheel has become very stiff. So now I know that these two are AN, and again, it's binding from the back to the front. So I keep having to go down. Now, what happened was I got to CAN. If I go down here, try to find C, keep those in line, find C, there we go. If I get C, make sure that thread is there, out of the way, and pull on the shackle, you'll see that it says CAN, and I turned, put some force on, nice and tight, and I turned these wheels, and again this third wheel's now binding. Now this is where you can get a bit clever. What words could be 6 letters long and end in can? So of course I looked up online, and there's all sorts of words like toucan and Vulcan, and I thought, well, Vulcan, possibly vulcanization, maybe I put Vulcan in. I put Vulcan in, wasn't right. Toucan, I thought, maybe something like exotic birds. I put toucan in, nothing worked. So I decoded the fourth wheel along, or the actual third wheel from the front, and I got down to NCAN. I thought, well, that is very strange, because NCAN isn't any of the words I found online that are 6 letters long ending with can. And then it hit me. Well, if you saw the thumbnail, you may have already figured it out, but it was a name. And I thought, well, could it be Duncan? So I put in Duncan, D-U-N-C-A-N. It's actually quite hard to get all of these aligned because they do rub against each other. And I gently pulled the shackle, and it released. And that was the first time for decades anybody had seen the code on this lock, and it was a name, which is really cool. Now, of course, I did ask my friend, was your father's name Duncan? She says, no, it wasn't. And they weren't sure. There's a Duncan in the family tree. It's possible it's a middle name. It's possible this was just bought from an antiquity shop many years ago, and this is a name from the previous owner. It could be a pet, a friend, who knows. But yeah, it is in beautiful working condition. The lock wasn't damaged at all in the process, and we can actually, this doesn't pull out any further, so I don't think it's supposed to. I think the picture where I saw this whole core here pulled out, the lock was possibly broken. But if we get the light in here, you can see some interesting features. So if you look down here where the tip of my light is, that there is one of those teeth that stands up. You can see that has come through a gate there. So there's actually, where that tooth is sticking up, you can see that it's gone through a gap in the inner wheel. The inner wheel looks like it's also made of, well, you've got the outer wheel here with little teeth on, which signifies each one of these letters. Then underneath you've got an inner wheel, which is probably iron, it could be brass, and those teeth are exactly the same as the ones you find on this horrible cheap padlock here. It works in exactly the same way as I suspected. Now you might think to yourself, well, how do you change the code on this? And I think it's like this. I'm going to make sure I don't do it, but these wheels can actually move out like that and separate into this gap. All of them can shift forwards by that 4mm, disengage with the inner wheels, allowing you to turn the outer wheel independently, and that means that these little notches here, which are engaging with teeth on the inner wheel, will disengage. You turn it to the new letter you want in this position, and that will then become the new code. So all you need to do is basically shift all of these while it's open. I believe, I don't want to do it, you can shift all of these out like that. You can see that you can separate them. I won't. So move all of these that way, turn them to whatever you want, then push them all back in a row, and then that will become your new code. So you can see here that that's it's Duncan. I just love the fact that I found out something which is decades, maybe even 100 years old, that code. Maybe nobody knew it, I don't know, apart from the original owner, but it was a really fun little lock to decode. The reverse decoding method worked. That Kevlar really allowed me to basically just have a free hand and work in comfort. And I just happened to have this for a whole other project. I didn't have it for this purpose, but it just so happened to be a perfect fit for just going underneath the shackle here and pulling on that end cap. So there you go. Also a beautiful lock, possibly made by Brecknell in London. Thank you to my friend for loaning me this. I will give it to her back, of course, in perfect condition. When next time I see them, and yeah, then they will have a working padlock. Anyway, thank you for staying with me for this video. Thank you if you stuck to the end. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, leave a like. If you have any comments, leave them below. I do read them all and reply to as many as I can. If you haven't subscribed and want to see more content like this, please subscribe. And as always, stay safe, happy picking, and I'll see you all next time.